I we recently we had elections in Venezuela. The country's electoral body, the CNA, proclaimed Maduro the winner, but the opposition has contested the results with the support of some Western governments, especially the US government, and Blinken saying they don't recognize Maduro and taking some steps back uh, a day after that, whatever. What is at stake in Venezuela right now, and how do you assess the positions of countries like Chile, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico?
Well, first, let's just stay with Venezuela before we come to the rest. I mean, it's a country that has had sanctions on it since 2014 in an intensified way. There were sanctions before then. Um, the country relied for 95% plus, more than 95% of its revenues, particularly dollar revenues, came from oil exports. The middle of 2013-14, oil prices fell. Mr. Chavez, who was the leader of the Bolivarian process, dies in 2013. For the last decade, the country has been under attack. Nicolas Maduro, who took over from Hugo Chavez, had a very difficult job. Firstly, he had to take over from this incredibly charismatic man. Secondly, oil revenues disappeared. Thirdly, sanctions increased, including attacks on him personally. Fourth, Mr. Maduro had to improvise to make sure that people weren't dying, in enormous numbers. So they had to open up sectors of the private business, because if the state is under sanction, you've got to have goods and commodities come in. They had to start privatizing, not by choice, but by necessity. And then 6 million Venezuelans left the country. They are sanctions refugees. They left the country also as part of a kind of exercise of power by the right wing in the region. Sebastian Pinera of Chile said, please come to Chile. Almost 500,000 Venezuelans came just to Chile. A very large number of out migration from the country. 6 million is no joke. It impacts the whole population. A population of 25 million or so, 6 million just disappears in the matter of a decade. So the country is under enormous stress and difficulty. On the one side, you have the Chavista machine. It's an election machine. There's like 1 million people organized in comunas and so on. They have a big machine. They can bring out several million people whenever they need to, because people are mobilized. And secondly, the ideology of Chavismo has deep roots. Even though there are difficulties in the country, even though, yes, there are serious problems of, petty corruption and so on, the Chavistas just believe in their project. They know, and here's the important point, that the opposition is hideous. The opposition led by Maria Corina Machado is comes from the old, what Chavez used to call esqualido right wing. The candidate for election this time, Edmundo Gonzalez, was perhaps involved in the torture of people in El Salvador when he was dispatched to the embassy there in the 1980s. Eyewitnesses say that he worked with one of the most important torturers that Venezuela had exported to El Salvador to help it in its torture and interrogation programs. These are hideous people. So the Chavistas would march on the street in the last few weeks and they would say, "No volverán." We are not going back. And they mean it precisely. We are not going back to the oligarchy. So that choice between trying to maintain the Bolivarian project, however broken it is, however in difficulty it is, to maintain that here or to return. And Maria Corina Machado, to her credit, hasn't tried to hide her agenda. She is in favor of privatizing the oil company. She has openly talked about returning property to those whom the Chavistas expropriated it from. I mean, this is her open agenda. Okay, she's not hiding it. I say it to her credit, because if she was a cleverer politician, she would not talk about her agenda. She would only say, Maduro is bad, I'm better, or my, puppet is better, Edmundo Gonzalez. Those are the stakes in the election. Now, interestingly, few days before the actual vote, which was on Chavez's birthday, 28th of July, a poll was released. Now, I found this fascinating. There were several polls, many internet polls done by right-wing newspapers in Venezuela. People who call Venezuela a dictatorship don't understand that media is mostly right-wing, frankly. It's not a left-wing media. Mostly it's a right-wing media. Anyway, polls appeared. There are no polling agencies of any merit in Venezuela. Sorry, polling agencies, Venezuela. I don't want to disrespect you, but seriously, it's not scientific, okay? But the poll that the opposition picked up on was done by a group called Edison Research, which is based in New Jersey in the United States. And it was actually just a statement, not a poll. It showed that the opposition was 30 points up from Maduro. A huge gap. In Venezuela, you don't see gaps like that. You see 8 points, 9 points gap. Anyway, this statement from this polling agency or this research agency, Edison Research, had no methodology. So there was no polling data. Like, how did you develop this data? Did you do phone surveys? Those are inaccurate because most of the people, the Chavistas, don't have phones. They may have cell phones. How did you get cell phone numbers to do? There was no methodology. I mean, it's totally unscientific way to present a poll. And secondly, Edison Research is a contractor of the CIA. It does a lot of jobs for Central Intelligence Agency outfits, Radio Free Liberty, things like that. Openly on their website, they tell you these are the things we're doing. It's not hiding anything. So Maria Corina Machado said, well, we're up by 30 points based on a CIA contractor. The next day, when the results started coming up, they had lost by 7 points. And they said the election was stolen. Now, I don't know whether the election was stolen or not, but you cannot say that it was stolen based on a fake poll done by a CIA contractor. Interestingly, after Chavez died, Maduro ran against Capriles, who was the opposition candidate, much better candidate than Edmundo Gonzalez or Maria Corina Machado. And the opposition made a lot of the fact that Chavez is now dead, there's nobody to lead the project. And Maduro won that election 51 to 49. Extremely close election. That 51% is interesting. A lot of people I talked to said that's about where the Chavistas land. They are able to secure the if less than 10 million people vote, the Chavistas will win 50 plus 1 votes. If more than 12 million votes, they may not win 50.1 plus 1 vote. But this election result seemed fair to most people. And I think that's where it is. Now, why do Lula, I don't understand. I mean, the facts are pretty clear. Like, there's no evidence. And they keep saying, well, why don't they publish the actas? Firstly, a foreign government cannot ask for the voting rolls to be published on its demand. That's bizarre understanding of sovereignty, right? Can you imagine if I say, I demand that the Brazilians release their polling records? I mean, who am I to demand anything? Who is Mr. Lula? I mean, I highly respect him and love him and so on, but he doesn't have any legal standing. A political party in Venezuela can actually request that. And interestingly, Edmundo Gonzalez has refused to appear at the Supreme Court to make a demand asking for the acts to be released. Why? Why are they not coming forward and demanding it along the legal lines? Why are they doing it outside the court? It's my opinion that they don't really want the acts to be released. Because if they are actually released, they may show that there was, the limited fraud that normally happens in election has happened. I'm never going to say there's no fraud in an election, okay? There's always some fraud in every election. Some percentage of some local person went nuts and did so. It's always possible. But why are they not making an, because they want to make the argument for fraud without actually allowing the process to be cleaned up. They're going to continue because since 2004, the referendum against Chavez, which failed, the opposition has called every election fraud. Every election since 2004, they have said is fraud. That's 20 years of crying fraud. They cry fraud. That's what they do. Why don't you try to win an election? An opposition politician told me about 4 years ago, yeah, December 2020. He was very funny. He told me that we can never really win an election unless we become Chavistas, like right-wing Chavistas, He said that Chavez thing about social welfare is now ingrained in Venezuelan society. So he said, we need to be right wing Chavistas. He said, I just trying to find a way to square free market economics with Chavez. And I was like, I shook his hand and said, good luck, man. But you see, he gets the point that it's hard. Now, maybe in 6 years, if the attack on Venezuela continues, the privations continue, people will just say, I want to surrender. That's different. That's different. That's a surrender to the imperialist attack on Venezuela. But right now, the people are not surrendering. And I am sorry to say I don't understand why Boric and Lula and others are being so strange about this issue. At the very least, they should say, let's have a conversation about what's going on, why it's happening like this, and so on. They got to, maybe Lula should go to Venezuela if he was willing to go to Tehran to make the peace deal. Why isn't Mr. Lula go to Caracas, meet Maria Corina Machado, meet Edmund Gonzalez, meet Mr. Maduro, meet other people in the government, go to the CNE, have a serious look at things, and then make a public statement. But to make it in a kind of cavalier way, I don't think is entirely helpful.